tech videos, gaming videos, and Jay Leno's Garage? How does that even go together? Listen and you'll find out. This is Multimedia J radio style for Friday, February 14th, 2020. Let's start the show.
Multimedia J radio style.
As I record this, it is now Friday, February 14th, 2020. The last time I did a podcast was on January 12th. So if anybody was concerned about this channel becoming a podcast channel during the latter half of 2019, I hope this clears that up. The fact remains that podcasts have their concentrated coolness as well, particularly with any kind of deep dive discussion where we have to do a lot of talking, as opposed to grinding some video to a halt instead of actually showing stuff in the video. The tech videos have struggled with that sort of thing for years, the gaming videos too. Podcasts are a solution to both issues. Speaking of issues, the discussion on ad blockers from 2017 that I re-uploaded is going to basically be what I have to say about that for the time being. I will eventually circle back around to this issue of ad blockers on YouTube, but for the time being, I think that considering how this is now a 3-year-old problem, or at least I've been keeping an eye on it for 3 years, and as YouTube Studio has developed, the ability to keep an eye on this stuff has gotten much better very recently. I think that everything that I said back in 2017 still applies today. Matter of fact, it's pretty scary just how that discussion vlog from 2017 could be misinterpreted as having been just recorded this year because the situation hasn't changed. But as it stands for the time being, it'll suffice to say that if you use an ad blocker on YouTube, you are holding back the content that creators want to make and that you want to watch. If you use an ad blocker on YouTube, you don't get to complain about YouTube because you're contributing to the very problem that breaks the ecosystem that Google is overseeing here. We'll save the deep dive elements of those ideas for later, but for now it will suffice to say if you use an ad blocker, you're not a fan of this channel and you're not a fan of YouTube. And you are part of the problem that is discouraging YouTubers on all kinds of channels, from big to small, in the last couple of years. So if you use an ad blocker, you're not gaining anything. You are holding back the content that creators want to make and that you want to watch. More on that later. Now, let's talk about the elements of the title and how they all go together and how any of that can make any sense whatsoever. Tech videos, gaming videos, and Jay Leno's Garage. How on earth do those three go together in terms of where this channel is going and what's next for tech, gaming, and otherwise on here? Well, I do take influence from a lot of different folks. Some folks have correctly pointed out that I'm inspired a bit by other tech channels like Paul's Hardware, Druaga1, Greenham Gaming, etc. But other than explicitly parodying any of those channels, or any one that I want to do a parody or a pastiche of, those of you who don't know what a pastiche is, it means style parody. Like, for example, most of Weird Al's songs where it sounds familiar, but you know it's not an explicit parody of a song, is probably parodying the style of someone more so than an actual song. And that's really what a pastiche is all about. It's interesting because a Weird Al documentary is actually where I learned that word from a couple of years ago. So it requires a little bit of learning to understand it, but then you'll appreciate it when you do. So, but other than explicit parodies or pastiches of other YouTubers on here, I don't actually want to be a copycat of any one channel in particular. This is always your show whenever you get into this YouTube thing. And in my case, I'm going to basically take things the way I want to take them. So as much as Greenham Gaming right now is taking a break from his popular format, copying his format would just be a lousy thing as a human being for me to do. And I think it would actually hold back the content of some of what I want to do with some of the tinkering with technology and video games that I want to do this year. The 2020s are a new year and a new decade, so copying old stuff doesn't really jive with that. So the decade began with me talking about taking more influence from LGR. And if you watch LGR's channel, LGR has a combination of tech videos and gaming videos and an audience that supports both. Part of that is because of how the tech and the gaming link together, whether he's talking about old DOS games or old 90s PC games or something along those lines. In my case, I'm not really diving into the DOS days in any way, shape, or form, nor am I really interested in any kind of 90s computer restoration because, quite frankly, computers sucked back in the 90s. There's a lot of, even the 2000s, even when the Silver Bullet was first built in 2002, there were still some issues related to PC gaming that I don't miss. Capacitor plague is the most publicized, but there were other issues at the time as well that make me glad that I'm looking at technology now as opposed to even back in my college days. There was a lot of stuff back then that was a lot worse than what we have nowadays. I think that PC gaming is being pushed in the right direction because of what's happened in the intervening years since then. So as it stands, bandwidth at the Geek House right now is at a premium. It's one of the reasons why I'm uploading a podcast for the time being, because I'm actually doing a lot of downloading to get Midnaughts, Tuxedo, and the Delosaurus ready to experiment with in terms of what plays what at what performance and quality levels these days. Might even bring the Turd Shiba and Rubbish into this little experiment as well as any other computer I happen to acquire or come across. Maybe I want to buy a new laptop or something, maybe see how the Ryzen U series mobile processors handle gaming, things along those lines. But hey, the convenience of account-based gaming like Steam and GOG that exists nowadays makes this so much easier in terms of just sign in on the device and download the games and see if they work. So I'm currently in the process of setting up Grand Theft Auto 5 and Forza Horizon 4 on all the systems to see what kind of performance they can all pull at their various performance levels. And this is where parodying a channel like Greenham would fall flat on its face, because my favorite Greenham video of all time is the one that I parodied directly. The Incredible i5 Dell has some great cinematic narrative to it. It's a fun video to watch as he basically has his Delosaurus moment with the Incredible i5 Dell running a Core i5 2400 Sandy Bridge era. But I've always talked about the wacky world of Multimedia J as being like going over a friend's house to watch them tinker with something. And so if you go over a friend's house to tinker with something, it's not going to be some fancy music or fancy camera shots or very thinly veiled narration with camera shots to disguise the fact that the video's not really doing anything but telling you a story. But that's all part of the magic of filmmaking and stuff like that. But in my case, it's like you go over to a house. Hey, how you doing? Hey, come in. Here's the latest computer I'm tinkering with, or here's the latest car that I'm wrenching on, or something like that. And it's a relaxed, laid-back environment where folks have fun, and you talk with your buddy, and they're like, oh yeah, I've done this to this car, I've done that to this car, I put this in that computer, I've set that up on that computer, and it runs like this, it runs like that. So there's an element of talking, and there's an element of showing what's going on. And this is where Jay Leno's Garage comes into the discussion, because I'm very surprised, but I actually like Jay Leno's format. So over on the Jay Leno's Garage YouTube channel, I mean, I'm used to Jay Leno being a lot more boisterous than he is nowadays, because I'm used to him as a comedian or a late night television host, which I guess you could say he retired from late night TV to do what he does now. Jay Leno's Garage has a lot more laid-back feel to it. It's not like the Roadkill show I used to watch before it went over to Motor Trend's streaming service. But yeah, it's pretty relaxed. But it also gets the format of going over a friend's house and watching him tinker with a car or whatever, or having him show you a car, something like that, down pat. There's no fancy music. Most of the videos that I've watched over on his channel usually begin with him showing you the car. You're in his garage. It's like going over the friend says, hey, come to the garage. Let's take a look at this thing. And talks about the car. There's some camera shots of the interior and the paint job and things like that and other stuff. Hey, this is a nice car. I like it. It has this. It has that. Let's take it for a ride. And then he takes it out on the road. Simple format, but it works. And so, because I could name several tech channels on YouTube that are inspiration for the wacky world of Multimedia J, what I'd like to do is, because I'm bringing the tech videos and the gaming videos together into the same series, and I was talking about bringing back Play Some Stuff or things like Benchmarks or something along those lines, and I might later on, but I think that the Quick Afflick series can take care of that the short stuff that I wanted to make, like showing how Tuxedo handles a certain benchmark or something along those lines, or showing how a single computer with a single hardware combination handles this little bit of content or something like that. I think that could take care of that just in that fashion. But as much as I've talked about the tech videos and the gaming videos coming together to take some inspiration from LGR, what I'd like to do is go from the tech format with, camcorder and talking about the hardware, and then switch over to the software side of things with gaming footage, wearing the gaming headset and whatnot, because unfortunately my Blue Yeti is now bolted to the desk over at the main system. So in terms of portability, I actually do need to pick up a new podcasting mic at some point. But for now, because I know that AMD, NVIDIA Shadowplay actually compresses the audio so that even my Yeti mic starts to sound like a gaming headset, I'm just going to take the gaming headset that I have a hard time finding a use for anyways, and find a use for it for the time being with the upcoming experiments, because I'm curious about the longevity, even if it means spoiling some of these old processors with graphics cards that are way too nice for them, of the pre-Ryzen AMD FX series, which Tuxedo has with the 8320E, even the Core 2 Quad. I'm also curious about the Athlon 3000G, which is at the bottom of the barrel of socket AM4 right now at $50, 2 cores, 4 threads. But I actually think that this type of processor, we'll talk about this some other time, this type of processor really gets the gears turning, because now you're talking about a super easy way to build a cheap computer with socket AM4 and then ramp it up to a Ryzen when you get more money later on. It's the sort of upgrade path that the previously rather fragmented CPU market didn't really cover. Matter of fact, when you thought about CPU upgrades, usually I called them guts upgrades, because the processor, the motherboard, and the RAM oftentimes went together, and there really was no way to have either of those three be a transferable upgrade. But the new world of socket AM4, especially when AMD has decided that the original 2020 expiration of the socket isn't going to happen anytime soon, socket AM4 has completely destroyed that mentality altogether. So it now makes sense, if you only have the money to get the system you want, but not necessarily a good processor yet, or better yet, no money except to use a bottom barrel APU. You can start with a 3000G and upgrade the processor through the various stages until you get a dedicated graphics card or something along those lines. And there are people on YouTube who have experimented with just the integrated graphics on the Athlon 3000G, standard clocks and overclocks. So as much as I'm curious about socket AM4 and the Ryzen 3700Xs when the next generation Ryzens come out and the old stuff goes on sale, as much as I'm curious about that, socket AM4 has me intrigued, and I'm actually legit curious about starting out with a bottom barrel Athlon chip, seeing what that can do, and then gradually adding hardware as things progress. This is something that just a couple of years ago when I built Monolith wasn't really a thing, and it is now. And this is one of the things that has improved with the move towards more consumer-friendly industry-standard stuff that makes you want to experiment with more hardware, which boosts sales from the hobbyist enthusiast segment that PC building has become. Because in corporate IT, there is none of this. Computers in a corporate world are appliances. You're worried more about overhead costs and the cost of doing business and uptime and security and things along those lines. It's not about building anything related to building a computer, other than following the hardware to see what's most cost-effective for a business on all fronts, not just performance. Because if you have a bunch of people just poking around in spreadsheets all day, you don't need a gaming rig with a Core i9 or a Ryzen Threadripper or something like that, and an RTX whatever. So it goes in the other direction, where the horsepower that we need in order to have people accomplish their tasks without getting slowed down by their computers, how do you do that and not have it cost a lot over the long run? Which is where some of these net tops that are coming into corporate America are coming from, because they do that with 35-watt processors, little 35-watt Core i5s that have just enough mathematical punch to fly all over desktop applications and Excel and do basic office stuff without batting an eye. But 35-watt processor. That's one of my curiosities, too. Get a Ryzen net top and see how far it goes with games, and what power it draws while doing so. So as you can see, I'm full of ideas. I just have to get around to doing this stuff. And in some cases, buying this stuff. And that's one of the reasons why I've gone on the warpath against ad blockers again, because we can't just talk about YouTube having an ad blocker problem where arrogant people are like, YouTube brings in $15 billion in revenue. They're not going to miss a little ad. Yeah, we're not just talking about that anymore. We're talking about what kind of content is being held back because channels aren't growing, or people feel like that YouTube isn't prioritizing their content because it's not making enough money to make the YouTube robots happy. So it's all business stuff. But ultimately, the more you support creators, even if you don't donate or buy merch or anything like that, just watch the videos with no ad blocker. The more you help YouTube do its thing, the more YouTube helps the creators do their thing. And in the case of channels like mine, where I want to explore curiosities with PCs, multimedia, and gaming, the more we can get to that kind of stuff, because we can raise the funds to, for example, buy hardware upgrades that make 0 sense for me to spend any of my own money on. And I've actually started keeping some books on that. You can't talk about numbers per the terms of service, but even the piddly ad revenue on a small channel that's been casually monetizing for years starts to add up. So some of the things like the RAM that I've been buying for Tuxedo and the Delosaurus and other stuff that I bought for the secondary systems, that's actually money that's come in through advertising and people supporting the channel that's paying for that. So it takes away the whole thing of not spending your own money on stuff you wouldn't buy anyways, and that makes the content just progress forward and cover more topics. So when creators get all mushy like it's some PBS donation drive or something about every little bit helps, that is true. Over time it adds up and it does help. But that's another discussion entirely. So hopefully this has kind of explained, the format on Jay Leno's Garage. It looks like the sort of thing I want to do with tech and gaming videos combined together. So if you see more bouncing between hardware tinkering and running games, now you know why. Of course, Greenham already did this with a narrative and whatnot, and his cinematic style. But I just want it to be like going over a friend's house and watching him tinker with stuff. Which is really the sort of thing I've wanted to do for pretty much the entire length of the channel, except for the few times I actually did try to do instructional content in the very early days. But it just all has been coming together over the last couple of years, and now, with the new year and the new decade, let's push forward and see how far we get. This is Multimedia J Radio Style. Don't touch that dial.